Chapter 32. Rayford was close to the seniority needed to fly international hold patterns for PanCon, so he enjoyed being jetted to Jordan aboard a supersonic transport by the U.S. Air Force. Rocketing across the Atlantic in the middle of the night, he imagined maintaining a 747 from continent to continent. He found it propitious that Abdullah Smitty Ababneh was away on assignment when he arrived, as Rayford was able to sleep off the jet lag at the beautiful Four Seasons, compliments of the U.S. government, and get acquainted with Amman by walking around. He visited the Roman amphitheater and the Citadel, but passed on the Eagle Distillery. That would only make him thirsty for things he shouldn't imbibe. Rayford had found himself less and less careful with his drinking when off-duty, so he inwardly pronounced this entire trip on duty. He had little doubt he was being closely watched, if not followed. The feds had to have been fairly impressed with his resume and record to entrust him with a diplomatic effort like this, but they would also want to make sure he kept his nose clean and didn't embarrass them. Rayford felt that, short of being awarded those international routes, he had pretty much reached the pinnacle of his profession. To have caught the attention of the government and to be on at least the long list for piloting the president or vice president, all that was gratifying. He needed new goals and dreams, and he wasn't about to scotch them all with, well, scotch. Rayford was scheduled to meet Abdullah and his superiors for lunch at the Al-Matar Air Base in Amman, Marca. He was transported there from his hotel via a Royal Jordanian Air Force jeep with a driver who understood very little English. Rayford couldn't make that compute, sending a monolingual man for an American. He was evaluating everything, trying to gauge whether his hosts were excited to have him there or were trying to tell him, in passive-aggressive ways like this, either that he was unwelcome or they were suspicious. The worst-case scenario, in his mind, would be the Jordanians feeling in any way pressured to host him. Those fears were immediately dispelled, however, when Rayford was ushered to a small private eating area within the commons at the airbase. There 5 men immediately stood, smiling and seemingly eager to meet him. He recognized Abdullah from his photo, and as the men were introduced in order of rank, Ababneh was last. It was plain, though, that Abdullah was a favorite among these men. Whenever he had the floor or anyone said anything about him, the others looked at him and beamed. It was as if he was the life of the party, and Rayford had to wonder if it could be real. His reputation for shyness and being a man of few words. He was quiet with Rayford there, that was for sure. The men, all of whom spoke passable English, had many questions for Rayford, many of them personal. The commanding officer remarked on the similarities between Rayford and Smitty. "I assume you understand why we call him Mr. Smith." "I've heard." They all laughed, and Abdullah, if Rayford could read a change in his dark face, appeared to redden. "It is because he is so much a fan of the United States that he wants to be an American. Some of us believe he really is, and is here in disguise." "Your own Yankee spy, eh?" Rayford said, and the men laughed. "Yes, and like you, he married a woman too good for him. And they have both a son and a daughter." The commander asked Rayford to sit next to Abdullah. "He will be your guide and interpreter," he said. "But you all speak English so well," Rayford said. "My apologies. I meant he will interpret our customs and practices. I was under the impression that this is your first visit to Jordan." "True. Then Abdullah is well equipped to inform you of what is going on. We customarily have our main meal at midday, which I understand is not true where you are from." "Right. Our main meal is usually in the evening. We have prepared for you a feast. In fact, we have brought in many helpers to cook and to help serve. I'm honored, Rayford said. It is our pleasure. Abdullah's eyes lit up, and finally he spoke. It is my assignment to take you up for some loops and rolls in the F-16 immediately after you have eaten. I sat with her fiancé until she returned, Leon said. She appeared less agitated than when she arrived. Did you win her over? I do not know, Nikolai said. And frankly, I do not care. I mean, I would like to assume she will think twice before talking poorly about me behind my back. But she is no threat. She has no platform. She will be seen as the wounded daughter, the grieving offspring, the betrothed who must naturally put off her wedding until an appropriate time after the funeral. I should attend both, should I not? The funeral and the wedding? The first, of course. For the wedding, you would need an invitation, and unless you charmed her, I do not foresee that. You see, Leon, you are short-sighted. What? Why? You think she will invite you? No, I would be shocked. But what will she or her people do if I show up? Ban me? Usher me out? It would be a scandal. I will bring a nice gift, enjoy the revelry, toast the bride and groom. Fortunato gazed at him with seeming admiration. I do not know where you come up with these plans, he said, but you are unique. We will enjoy the Mansaf, Abdullah said. It is not only my favorite, it is nearly everyone's favorite. It proves I really am Jordanian by blood, but please, call me Smithy. Hors d'oeuvres, which Abdullah called maza, began the meal and consisted of a variety of hot and cold treats that could have served as a meal in themselves. Then came salads and mounds of bread to be eaten dry or dipped in one of many sauces. The aroma alone intoxicated Rayford, but Abdullah assured him they had just begun. When it came time for the main dish, Rayford had never seen so much rice. It was delivered in heaping, steaming bowls. The mansaf proved to be lamb seasoned with herbs and light spices, cooked in yogurt and eaten with the rice. Rayford had wondered if he would find the cuisine too exotic. This he would never forget. The bread alone would have filled him, and the rice proved overkill. Still, there were dessert pastries to come, and when he finally finished with those, including baklava and katayef, the heavy scent of coffee wafted from the kitchen. There is another smell I don't detect in American coffee, Rayford said. Abdullah smiled. Cardamom seeds. You will enjoy. The coffee was poured from long-handled copper pots, and Rayford was struck that only a few drops went into each cup. He made the mistake of slugging it down as if it were a sample. The men laughed when it hit his system and woke him. His cup was refilled every time he took a sip, but he soon noticed that when the others had had enough, they tipped their empty cups from side to side. Once he had done that, the repouring stopped. Rayford didn't know whether it was the cardamom or caffeine, but something had brought his senses to life. Rayford found himself in delightful pain and knew his hosts had to feel the same. They all sat back and patted their bellies as they chatted, all save for Abdullah. The shortest and lithest of them all, he had eaten a lot, but nowhere near the quantities Rayford and the others had packed away. As the table was being cleared, a high whining cry came from loudspeakers around the base, and the men quickly sat up. "It is time for the midday salah," Abdullah said. "You are not expected to participate, of course, and I have been given permission to merely explain it to you." "The salah," Rayford said. "Our Muslim ritual of prayer. We do it 5 times a day, and when we can, we are to first bathe and then get to a mosque. People in unusual occupations, like ours, who are not able to get to the mosque are free to perform the ritual wherever they can. The other men hurried off to the washroom, then returned and pulled mats from a corner and knelt before a window facing Mecca. What you just heard, Captain Steele, was the azan, which is called out by the muezzin, commanding us to pray. It sounds like a long song, Rayford said. What is he saying? He says 4 times, Allah is most great. Then twice, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. Then twice, I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Then twice, come to prayer. And twice more, come to the good. Finally, twice, Allah is most great. During the pre-dawn call, the muezzin adds twice, prayer is better than sleep. Abdullah whispered, Frankly, Captain, there are mornings when I am not so sure. As Rayford watched, the men stood on their mats with their hands to their ears. Then they folded their hands right over left on their chests. They bowed and placed their hands on their knees, then stood upright again. They then prostrated themselves fully on the ground, sitting up and then repeating the ritual. All during this, the men murmured phrases in praise of Allah. Finally, sitting again, each passed a greeting to one another. Abdullah interpreted this. Peace on you and the mercy of Allah. Some say the worshipper is greeting fellow Muslims, but others say he is speaking to an angel on each shoulder who records his good and bad deeds. Rayford did not know why, but this all hit him as terribly ritualistic and depressing. In many ways it reminded him of his own feeble attempts at religion, the obligation to go to church when he could, and guilt when he found excuses not to. Abdullah confirmed Rayford's suspicion. This fixed ritual is so rigid that in our religion there is no departure from it. The devout practitioner performs it 5 times a day, cleansing himself and getting to the mosque whenever possible to do it with the rest of the congregation. And they bathe before each time? Abdullah nodded. It is called ablution, and when possible it includes washing face, hands, feet, and sometimes the whole body. Really? Oh, yes. If you are in a state of ceremonial impurity, the Holy Book requires you to fully bathe. What if you do not have access to water? Then you are to use sand and earth. And this is 5 times a day? Abdullah nodded. And that is not all. There are many other prayers and rituals, but the 5 per day are the minimum requirement. There is the early morning prayer, which may be offered any time between dawn and 2 hours later. The noon prayer may be offered any time after the sun begins to decline. The 3rd prayer begins soon after the middle of the afternoon. Calendars tell the time of each prayer, but otherwise one must resort to his best judgment. The sunset prayer begins after sunset and extends till the glow in the horizon disappears. The evening prayer time then continues till before the dawn. What is the point of all this, if you don't mind my asking? Abdullah shrugged. The devout Muslim believes he is making his entire day spiritual from beginning to end and in between. He combines his religion with his life and believes he is building his morals on strong foundations. He believes he is making his whole life a spiritual exercise. What about you, Abdullah? Do you have to make up for missing this one? Please, I prefer Smith or Smitty. And yes, if I were pious, I would be owing a double prayer now. He whispered, I am ashamed to say I am not so pious. The ablution alone is filled with many requirements, and also many ways in which it can be nullified. If you are wondering whether I fear for my mortal soul, yes, I was raised Muslim and am steeped in the tradition. But an impersonal, demanding God holds less and less appeal as I get older. This, Rayford decided, was something he and Abdullah were going to have to discuss. It was far afield from the mission of his trip, but these were universal issues with which he could identify. To him it didn't matter what your religion was, but too many demands took all the joy out of it.